Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session talking about an introduction to the infrastructure. We've got a number of things to go through. Next slide. Here's the agenda. So I'm going to talk through a bit on the updates to the data request, branded variables and MIP tables. Lauren will cover controlled vocabularies. David will talk about the model registration and essential model documentation and the grid registration process. We have Phil to give us an update on ESGF. Sergi will give us an introduction to the energy consumption carbon footprint task team activities and the data they'd like to collect. And then we should have some time for questions and answers. There is a new set of CMIP7 guidance pages, and there's a link on the slide through to the guidance for modelers there, which has been put together and will be updated as we move along. Next slide, please. Okay, data request, branded variables and MIP tables. Again, next slide. So the data request, hopefully many of you are familiar with the data request from CMIP6. It's a large specification of which variables are wanted by which communities from which experiments in CMIP. The latest release notes for this are up on the IPO website, so you can see the link there. It's organized by opportunities. So this is an object which maps variables against particular scientific requirements and links through to a set of experiments and a set of various groups of variables that are all wanted from those experiments. We've got an API to help you resolve all of that. There is a core set of variables, the baseline climate variables. These are set as core priority within the data request. We're asking modelling groups to do their best to provide as many of these as they possibly can to give a consistent core to the archive. The background to setting up that is in Martin Jukes' paper on the baseline climate variables, linked there. The data request, I mentioned the Python API, which is available on GitHub. And there's an Airtable web browser view if you're just looking through for bits of information. There will be updates and changes to this as we go ahead. Next slide, please. Can you still hear me? Next slide, please.
Is that not the next slide? Can you not see it?
Oh, sorry. Yep, it's just updated. Apologies. Right. Data request structure. There is some changes to the, well, sorry, apologies. The data request was put together with the concept of having the set of core variables, these are the baseline climate variables, a harmonized section, which is what has been developed for the assessment fast track, and an unharmonized portion, which will come to in the future, where MIPS will be allowed to define new experiments and add new variables without as much of the process we've been going through for the CMIP7 assessment fast track. The unharmonized portion is something we'll probably come back to most likely middle of next year, I'm guessing, because we haven't had a chance to implement that. So that is very much future work while we focused on getting the core developments ready for the assessment fast track. Next slide, please. A new thing for CMIP7 is the branded variables. This is a new naming system for variables. You may be familiar with the MIP table and variable name we had in CMIP6. So, for example, AMON-TAS, monthly mean near surface air temperature for the whole globe. This is being replaced by a branded variable name, which describes the variable itself and then various bits of information about the variable. It's temporal processing, so TAVG denotes a time average, a vertical structure, height 2 meters for this variable, horizontal structure, and a masking area label. So this combined with its frequency and the region will make up a number of facets of the file name and the DRS. Variables differing only by frequency or region will have the same branded name. So if you're looking for variables at 3 hourly or daily or monthly frequency, you should be looking for the same branded name on when you search for data. And we hope this will make this a lot easier for users to understand what variables are by allowing them to interpret this structure. The data request includes a CMIP7 compound name. This is a composite of the modeling realm, the variable the branding, frequency, and the region. But to ease the transition, there's also a name very similar to the CMIP6 name, such as AMONTAS. There's more information up on the CMIP7 guidance pages, and we will be hope to get more communications out on this in the near future. Next slide, please. MIP tables. Many of you will be using CMOR or something similar to process your data, and to allow that, we've constructed a set of MIP tables. So the reference up on GitHub there, these have been constructed directly from the data request. They will eventually be constructed from a variable registry, which will be hosted as part of the controlled vocabularies, but due to time pressures, this is not available yet. These MIP tables are organized by modeling realm, so rather than many different CMOR tables for the different variables, there will be just one for each realm. They are keyed by branded variable name, and you've got an example on the screen there of the various bits of information for a particular entry. To write a variable, you're going to have to provide 2 extra bits of information compared to CMIP6. You have to provide its frequency and its region. This is new for CMIP7. You need to get this information from the data request. So this will define what frequencies these variables are requested at. That's all from me on this section. I think I'll hand over to Laurent now to talk about the controlled vocabularies.
Hello, everybody. I will talk about mainly the changes about the controlled vocabulary in CMIP7 compared to CMIP6. So next slide, please. So to dive in the subject, if you use CMOR, you should not need to interact with the CV directly, because the CMOR table will be built as Matt already presented from the CV. So you will not have to interact with it. You will do model and grid registration, as David will present next. Beyond this, you need to engage with the CV will be very small. If you are IPSL or CNRM, you have a special link to the CV, so probably you know what's going on. If your modeling center doesn't use CMOR or doesn't know how to standardize, please reach us through the GitHub issue with the link here, and we could help with your case. Next slide, please. So the registration process to be able to add something in the CV, this is mostly managed via the EMD, the Essential Model Documentation Registration Process. So in GitHub, the issues that you will create act as a form that you can fill, and then it will allow us to get the pull request auto-generated, reviewed, update, approved, and merge into the CV to get the thing working smooth. There are also forms for non-model stuff like the experiment registration. So if you know people who want this, point them to the issue for that, and we can help with this process as well. The IPSL, CNRM, and the 2 others institutions are the guinea pig, the beta testers for this process, and they will help us find the pain point and where we can ease the process. So you could thank them later. Yes. Next slide, please. So the notable change from CMIP6, there will be a mandatory QA/QC quality check for the dataset that are published. So in CMIP7, there will be some basic stuff like we will check the typo inside the global attribute and some other things, but very basic stuff. The things to know is that if you do not meet those basic tests, your data will not be able to be published. So have a look at that. Next slide, please. Another change is the DRS, the data reference syntax for the file name and directory. So here is the slide for the file name. you can see the previous file name template that you are probably aware of. And we changed something. So we get rid of the table ID. We use now the region and the frequency. We split the information because the table ID was the mix of those two information. We move the grid label elsewhere in the template. And we mainly added the branded variable stuff and mainly the branded suffix to help differentiate between reporting difference for same variable and so on. And just a basic renaming from member ID to variant label. That's it for the file name. And next slide, please. For the directory, it's kind of the same changes from the file name, but we added a DRS spec collection at the start of the DRS for the directory. It will define effectively the DRS behind these DRS specs. This makes it easier for tools to anticipate what comes in the folder, and we will be able to build tools from that. Another change was is the renaming from member ID to variant label. We get rid of the table ID and we added the branded suffix as well for the directory. The version is now called the directory date because it was the version was a date when we published the data. So it's just a renaming stuff. As previously, you should not need to think about those changes for most parts because the tool will handle this stuff for you. Next slide, please. We changes some required global attributes. So in the we added all the branded related attributes, all the different label of the suffix that you saw in the previous slide from Matt, and the branded variable. We added the DRS specs, the region, license ID. All of this is basic things. In CMIP7, the experiment grid, institution, license, source, and source type was mandatory. We have made them optional because in fact in the global attribute there were two attributes that point to the same terms in the CV, so it was kind of tricky to validate those things, and there were some error and some discrepancies inside the file, so we made it optional. You could still put the right description for all those things, but the global attribute that will be validated is the ID. The experiment ID is still a required global attribute, and the same for institution, source, and such. We will take the ID, and then we could retrieve the description from the ID. And we dropped the concept of sub-experiment that was used for the CPP activity, I think, experiment. The information of the sub-experiment is captured now by the initialization index inside the variant label. That are the main changes from the CV perspective for modelers. Next slide. But I think it's okay. All other things you may have heard of if you look for CV and such. ESGVOC is a library that is developed to interact directly with the CV from your local laptop, because all the CV are hosted on GitHub to be able to be public and transparent. And this library allows you to not having to care about how the CV is constructed and such. So you can take the library and query the CV pretty much easily. The branded variable already discussed by Matt. The variable registry, we still plan on doing this, but this is on hold for now because of time pressure. So to get the your variable information, go to the data request instead, like Matt said. Data specs, this will be a unique version number. We are working on it, but we do not know exactly how this will be managed yet, and detail will come soon. Next slide, please. Yes, it's done for me. I will pass on David, I think.
Thank you. Okay, yes, so now we'll move on to the model documentation and registration section. So next slide, please. So the key point about the model documentation, the model descriptions for CMIP7 is we're taking a very different approach to, well, a different approach to CMIP6. And as I said here, the aim is to make it easier and more useful from the CMIP6 experience. And of course, that is a statement of the fact that it wasn't that easy to create documentation for CMIP6 and it wasn't that useful what was created. So we're really trying hard to do something better this time. Next slide, please. So the main differences to CMIP6 are that, firstly, we've moved away from the old ESDoc formulation we were using and following a new EMD standard, Essential Model Documentation Standard. These are not incompatible with each other. It's just that the EMD standard is just focusing on the model documentation and not the full range of other types of documentation. And it's pared down and simplified to focus just on that. And the second point here is probably the key, the largest difference in CMIP6 is providing the model documentation is not an option anymore. It is mandatory. If you don't provide the documentation, you won't be able to take part in CMIP7 because you won't be able to register your models for the project. So that's a big change. And when you do this, compared with CMIP6, we know it will be easier and quicker to do. So we're only going for a more overview description of the models rather than very specific questions about particular model aspects to answer, which don't apply to all models, and there's all sorts of problems with them. So the overview is able to be answered for all models. And also the structure is simpler. Instead of every component having different types of questions, everything's the same. So it's a much easier process to fill in. So the benefits of this will clearly we'll have complete coverage of our model descriptions contributing to CMIP7 because all CMIP7 models will have created it as part of the registration. And this really will make the EMD, the Essential Model Documentation, a really useful resource for anyone, be they analysts from modeling centers, people, downscalers using this data in 5 years' time, archive service providers, a whole range of people will, I think, benefit from this new resource. Next slide, please. So how will you create this if you're a modeling center? So it'll be entered as part of the GitHub form that we're using for model registration. So the GitHub form is, it'll look like just like a normal web form, but it's hosted via GitHub. And the content that you put in sort of can automatically get ingested into the GitHub storage. And once you've entered the documentation, so the form will lead you through the questions that need information. There will be a human-based review phase just to check the documentation sort of make sense in a general way. We're not actually checking that the facts in it are right and cross-checking, but a sort of sanity check, if you like. And then if there are any changes to be discussed, they will be discussed via a GitHub issue, and when the EMD is agreed and accepted, it's then stored in GitHub, as I said, in a JSON, the familiar JSON file format. And it's not a sort of one-shot thing. Once it's been ingested into the JSON files, it can be edited, updated at any time by the usual issue and pull request mechanism that I think most of us are familiar with from previous phases of CMIP. So next slide, please. Yeah, okay, so yeah, onto grid registration. This is something a bit new for CMIP7, so next slide. So the new aspect is that, well, partly new. In CMIP6, all output datasets did have a grid label as part of their file name and inside their global attributes. But this grid label was quite a vague concept. It said this data is on the native grid from which from the model that produced it, or it's not on the native grid. It was very very sort of generic and vague. For CMIP7, the grid label will actually uniquely identify what the horizontal grid of the dataset is across all of the CMIP7 datasets and models. So this label itself is just an arbitrary string, such as G53 would be the 53rd registered grid. But it can be looked up as to what exactly that is in the GitHub store of descriptions, and these follow the essential model documentation standard, which has a lot of detailed description of grids. And so you can use this grid to say, I want to find all data sets that have this particular grid, and it's a very useful lookup facet. And as I said, this is quite different to CMIP6, where the grid label was not a useful search term in that sense. It was very vague. This now should be a very useful search term, for example, for finding related files or area files and so forth. So in order to publish to ESGF your data, of course, you need to know what grid it's on so that you can have the correct grid label for the file names for your datasets. So it's clear that any grids that you use must be registered before your ESGF publication time. But this doesn't obviously have to be at model registration time, because the publication is obviously usually quite some time after registration for most people. Now, when you create your essential model documentation, all of the native grids that are part of that are part of the description, will automatically be given their own grid label. So if you're archiving on your native grid of your model, then the grid labels will already exist and you can just pick it up and use it, no problem. But if you need to create a new grid label, say maybe you've interpolated your grid to your data to a different grid from what the model was integrated on, then these are easily just added via a GitHub form, just like for the essential model documentation, and the grid description is just the same as you would have provided for the essential model documentation. So that should be quite straightforward, I hope. And thank you. Next slide. I think that's me done.
You're on mute, Phil.
Sorry, I was muted. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about the updates to the Earth System Grid Federation, which is the distributed data infrastructure for providing access to the model outputs for CMIP7, and it's been doing that ever since CMIP5. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what we're calling the next generation architecture for ESGF. The original architecture developed around 2009 time is pretty much unchanged in the Federation up until fairly recently. And around about 2019, we started an initiative within the ESGF community to re-architect ESGF and to re-engineer the software in response to sort of lessons learned from operating infrastructure and feedback from the user community as well. So one of the major areas and one of the places where it really impacts on the user experience is actually discovering and accessing the data in the first place. So in the original architecture, we had a peer-to-peer system where there were a number of independent, largely independent nodes, but which synchronized content, search content between themselves. So at each site that hosted ESGF, roughly speaking, there was what we call a data node, so a place where you could access the data, but also an index node, which was a place where you could actually search and discover data sets from around the Federation. So there were two major changes that we wanted to introduce with the new architecture. One was to bring in a new standard for discovery of data, because the original search system is a bespoke one that's just used by ESGF. So we were very keen to make ESGF more interoperable with other systems. So for that reason, we adopted a specification called STAC, Spatio-Temporal Asset Catalogue, which is a standard that's had a lot of traction in the Earth observation community and actually beyond as well. We're seeing a lot of take-up in a lot of different communities wherever you've got geospatial data. The other major change is that instead of having lots of sites running index nodes, so the special service that allows you to discover data, rather than having many of them, we took the choice to reduce that and simplify that, and so that we would have 2 major index nodes instead. So we're calling those West and East catalogs. So West is in the US and East is hosted in the UK. And the content of those 2 is synchronized together using a special message passing system based on open source software Kafka. For the actual user experience, there's an updated user interface, MetaGrid, which replaces the existing web-based system, which was called COG. And there's a new software stack for interacting with data with the command line as well. So there's a package called Intake ESGF, which can provide all the abstraction from the stack specification and allow you to really easily search against the different search facets and then access the data. So actual access of the data is through HTTPS as well. So in some sense, there's no change there, but also with Globus as well, but limited to fewer nodes for the Globus access. There's the ESG pull software as well, which is a command line tool, which allows you to do a bulk data download from searches that you specify from a command line. And another significant change as well, augmenting the HTTP access that we have, we are supporting ZAR-style access to data. So ZAR is a really popular format for data, and it allows you to do time slicing and various other variable slicing of data across lots of different data all in one go. So it's kind of like a data cube approach. So what we're doing this time around with next generation architecture for some nodes is that we're augmenting that file-based content with a ZAR-style access. So you'll be able to access the data using more of a data cube style paradigm. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of getting the data into the system, we've been updating the existing ESG published software so that it can support the new stack-based interface, because stack is used not only for search, but also for actually uploading new metadata content when you publish data. The role of ESG-VOC is really important, and the control vocabularies with the publisher this time round. And again, in response to lessons learned from last time, there was a real desire to improve the quality control for quality assurance for the actual data being published. So what happens is that when you publish data to the West or the East node, the data is checked against the control vocabularies from ESG-VOC to make sure that it's compliant, and it'll actually reject the data if it's for any reason it doesn't meet with the terms that are used in the CVs. With the identity and access management, all the data is open access, so you don't need to sign in to access the data. It's the same arrangement as was for CMIP7, but you do need to interact with the identity and access management system if you're publishing data. And in order to support that, we've got, again, similar to the concept of a West and East catalog, we've got 2 main identity hubs, one in the US using Globus and one for UK, EU using EGI check-in. And so you can go to either of those sites and then you can go on to sign in using your home identity. So it could be an institutional identity from a university or other lab or organization. Both Globus Auth and EGI check-in support lots of different identities. Alongside the data access, we're also providing compute capabilities, so server-side compute for some nodes. And so that will be through the OGC's Web Processing Service Standard, WPS, and also through Globus Compute. And we also plan to offer Jupyter Notebook access as well, again, for some of the nodes. Next slide, please. Right, it's a bit of a busy diagram, but it's sort of showing in pictures what I was just describing to you. Maybe if we work from the bottom and then work our way up. So you can see those disks and computers at the bottom. They represent the different data nodes in the federation. We've got a concept of tiering for our nodes. So there are some nodes that offer a higher quality of service, so we're calling those tier 1 nodes. And then some nodes that maybe are more for a local community, or maybe they don't offer the full suite of services. But the tier 1 nodes offer the kind of the quality of service, the compute capabilities, and all the synchronization with the message, with the search system as well. So we just look above that, the layer above. So we've got the publishing system. So a given site can publish data. And when they publish it, behind the scenes, what happens, they don't need to know about it because it's hidden away. But the publishing content is put into a message queue. And then the West and East catalogs listen to that queue and take up that metadata that's been published and copy it into their respective indexes. And then once they've done that, they're actually synchronized with each other. So if you do a search at the West catalog or at the East catalog, you should get the same search contents. And it gives us a level of redundancy and resilience for the federation so that if one catalog went down, the other one is still available for all the user community. So sitting on top of that, above the catalogs, we've got the various services which interact with the catalogs and allow you to search and discover data. So we've got Metagrid, which is the replacement to COG, which I mentioned, Intake ESGF for command line access with Python, and then ESG pool for doing bulk data transfer and copying. Okay, so next slide. I think that's it. Yeah.
Morning, everyone. So I will briefly introduce the new task team focused on the energy consumption and carbon footprint. As you know, we need computing resources to run the climate simulations, and thus we consume energy. And until now, there have been limited efforts to quantify the costs of simulating in computationally energy and let alone the CO2 equivalents. And this task team was created to fill this gap. And next slide, please. Okay, so more precisely, our goals are to quantify the CO2 equivalent related to specifically the simulations. So we are not including things such as data storage, transferring the data, or even traveling, but only the computation itself on the HPC side. We also will be collecting some basic computational performance information from both the air system models and also the HPC systems they run on. This will help identify performance bottlenecks in the model so that centers can improve computationally speaking. And we also will be able to rank HPC sites in terms of how well suited or efficiently they run climate code. Each modeling center will be asked, therefore, to provide some general model and machine information, as well as some metrics at the experiment level. Next slide, please. So here is how it will work. So each modeling center will receive a private spreadsheet to fill in. It will include fields for each experiment and model configuration. And we will be distinguishing between production, tuning, and discarded simulations so that we can capture the total computing effort invested on each of those phases. And the metrics are organized into different tiers, from tier 1 being like essential and the minimum essential data that all centers are expected to provide, allowing to estimate the energy consumption and CO2 emissions, up all the way to tier 3, which require a little bit more work, provide more detailed metrics, but are kept as optional. To make this process easy for all of us, we will be providing some guidelines, shared Q&A, and direct support from our task team so that centers can reach out at any time through a dedicated contact email. So next slide, please. So once the data is collected, it will be compiled and analyzed by the task team, and the results will be fit into a peer-reviewed publication where we will prepare aggregated and per group analysis, offering insights into model performance, quality, bottlenecks, and overall efficiency. And we hope that this will help both the modeling groups and the HPC communities to understand where the computational effort goes and how it can be reduced, whether through more efficient codes or better matched hardware. Finally, we are also exploring the creation of a dashboard similar to the initiative from ESGF Data Statistics portal to provide at a glance overview of the results that we achieved. That I think it's all I have to say. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Lovely. Just to add to this, we've got our guidance pages with the links up there. So sort of particularly the guidance for modelers pages has recently been populated with lots of updated information for CMIP7. So please do look at that. If you've got feedback, things we're missing, things are incorrect, then please raise issues on GitHub, or there's the discussions forum on on GitHub where you can ask questions as well. Next slide, please. Lovely. So we've got Q&A now. Before we do that, I'm just going to drop in one more piece of information. So this is something that we didn't get a chance to put a slide together on about data repacking. So there will be communication coming out to you about this in the next week or so, where we'll be asking all modeling groups to use some tools to repack the files they're producing to make it a lot easier and quicker for users of the data to do their analysis. This is about the internal structure of NetCDF files, exactly how the various different coordinate data is chunked, and there's some tools which will optimize this, which we've got, which you can communicate more about soon. Okay. Q&A. So welcome anyone to stick their hands up.
We've got a question in the chat from Chris Leonard. Is the new generation ESGF only for CMIP7 data?
No, it's not. It's definitely for all the data. There is a bit of a legacy issue with older data, and we took the decision that it was going to be too much work to migrate over to CMIP5. But for example, yesterday we were having a discussion about Codex CMIP6 and also OBSVA-MIPS as well. We've been looking at that. So yeah, for sure, it's been very much in the minds of us as we've been designing the new architecture that we wanted it to be. It's one of the improvements actually that we felt that the original system wasn't very good at that. And for the new system, we really wanted to make it very much more modular so that you can add other data beyond CMIP7.
Thank you, Phil. We got any other questions? Okay, so we've got some in the chat. So for one for David, during or before publication, how will data centers verify that grids have been registered?
Hi. Yeah, so I think the idea is that you either know your grid's registered because you registered as part of your own model documentation, but otherwise you would type in the details of the grid, and the form would tell you if that grid has already been registered and already has a grid label. So it's you say I want to use this grid, and it might say, okay, great, you can use G76 as your grid label, and off you go. And if it's not there, it'll say, please, it'll register the grid you've entered and give it a new label there and then. So there will be an initial period where lots of grids maybe get registered by the first people who need it, but a lot of grids will be then usable by other people as well.
David, I'll maybe keep you because there's another grid registration question. How do you register a grid for which there's no standard yet? Can multiple models have the same native grid, which is then registered multiple times?
No, so or yes and no, trying to pick out which bits of that. The essential model documentation grid has a sort of section on describing horizontal grids, which should be able to uniquely identify any grid. So there's no danger of a duplicate registration, is the idea. So it includes information about the projection and the stagger location of the variables, and an anchor reference grid cell location and number of cells and all sorts of things. So if I understand the question correctly, there should be no confusion between grids, and there's no distinction between a native grid and a non-native grid. It's just a grid. Some are used natively inside models and some are used for output only. But the description of the grids is identical, and we believe is sufficiently has sufficient information in it that there can be no confusion.
Thanks, David. The next question we have from Paul Leopardi at Access NRI is, will the computational data collection include executable compilation, trial and development runs, spin-up, pre-processing and post-processing, such as CMORization?
No, we will not be including the compilation, nor any type of post-processing into the computational analysis, but only the simulation part, and that, yes, it includes any trial or development runs, spin-off, under that tuning simulations, which are any runs performed during the calibration of development of the model, but that didn't meant to be for direct publication.
I've got another one for you, Sergey. The EC Earth community will run the same experiments, but they're on different HPC platforms. How will you account for that?
Yeah, so on that spreadsheet that will be shared among the modeling groups, you will have different tabs, each for the different platforms that you might use. So that will be kept separated.
Great, thank you. We've got one from Shooting. Would the ESGF publisher for CMIP6 Plus be the same as for CMIP7 data?
Yeah, absolutely, it would be. So with this modular architecture, the idea is you can use the same publishing software, but there's a sort of kind of like a concept of plugins. So there's you know, a plugin for each set of CVs, each DRS. So you know, CMIP6 Plus has got a different one, then you can use that plugin for that one, and so on. You know, one for CMIP7, one for Cortex CMIP6, and so on. But yeah, it's the same ESG published software.
Thanks, Phil. Fabi from DKRZ has asked if the documentation, the grid registration and the repacking is mandatory, is there a risk that this becomes too much of an obstacle for modelling groups who don't have the resources to prepare everything? Maybe one for you, Matt?
Yeah, so yes, there will be a certain amount of work involved in picking up these things. But we do need to make sure we have an archive of data that can be used for science efficiently, so that while there is a cost for modelling groups in picking this up, it will reap benefits for the users of the data. We are mindful of how much work that this is going to be for modelling groups.
Would it be okay if I just added something to that?
Yep.
Yeah. I think the experience from serving the data to the community over the years is that in as much as the data is in a ready format for analysis, it's such a huge benefit. You get much more traction from the user community to use the data. You know, I appreciate it's a lot of work and it's a lot of ask to get that data in that right form, but we've seen it firsthand, the reaction from users when the data's really in that usable format, or it isn't, as the case may be, it just makes a huge difference. So yeah.
Thanks, Phil. Chris has got a follow-up question on other data kind of going on ESGF. Will the current version of ESGF be maintained for some years, thinking about whether we'll have to develop new workflows for CMIP6 data? Chris, do you mean the current version as not the next generation?
Yeah, correct. So we at the moment we download data off ESGF, CMIP6, CMIP5, and we've developed workflows to process to do the download, and then we have to delete it because we don't have enough space once we're done. So I'm just thinking, will this current version of ESGF be maintained for a while, or will the whole thing migrate into this new generation? So we have to redo all of our workflows.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're having to migrate everything, and there is good reason for that. Probably not long enough on this call to explain all the reasons, but as I sort of hinted at when I was presenting, there is significant legacy in what we have. You know, we've got a system basically that was put together in 2009 time. You know, that's over 15 years. That is a very, very long time for a software system. So we have to make these changes, but we've been very mindful of the client tooling. And, you know, for example, with the ESG Publish, it's still the same interface, but we've tried to rewire it behind the scenes so that from a client experience point of view, you still get to use the same software. But yeah, I mean, inevitably there will be other changes. ESG Pool's another example where we're taking the existing ESG Pool and re-engineering it for the new system.
Understood, thanks.
Thanks, Phil. Another one from Klaus. Do any of the changes in the metadata have an impact on the CMOR library? More specifically, is there an update of the CMOR library required for summarizing CMIP7?
Yep. So it is an update. Apologies for not mentioning it. You'll need to pick up CMOR version 3.13 in order to be able to output the global attributes in the right way and and apologies, and pick up the ability to read the MIP tables that came in about CMOR 3.10. So that you will need to update that. Fabi's just asking about the repacking, integrating that into CMOR. That has partially been done, and we'll discuss that with the CMOR developers about updating CMOR to cover that in a future version, but that's not there yet.
I think we got all the questions there in the chat. Has anyone got any more? Feel free to put your hand up as well. David, put your hand up.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to the last question that Matt answered. The tool we've prepared for repacking the data it couldn't be simpler to use. It's called CMIP7 Repack, and you just pass all of your files through it, and it just does it for you, and then you can send your files off for publication. So it takes a little bit of time to run, but there's absolutely no sort of preparation and setup required. So I hope that makes, you know, it was very conscious that we needed to make this straightforward because it was a bit of an extra work. So whilst it might take a little bit of time to do, there shouldn't be any difficulty in using that tool. Thanks.
So Klaus has asked, does CMIP7 Repack duplicate the amount of data?
No. Each file is duplicated as it's repacked, but the default behavior is it then overwrites the original file. So you can choose to keep the original copies. I should say the repacking doesn't change a single bit of the actual information in the file. It's just an internal technical restructuring that allows the file to be accessed remotely. There's no, you can test your data values and all your attribute values. They'll be identical before and after. So there should be no need to keep the unrepacked versions.
Thanks, David. Phil, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to give a little bit more context. You know, David could explain this better because he did a whole study on this, but we're trying to support the paradigm that's increasingly prevalent and is I think it's the future basically for access of data over HTTP, where people are using range get operations to just take out a tiny chunk of data, perhaps. What David found in his research is that if you repack the data, it massively improves the efficiency of those operations. And in fact, I think if you don't, it makes it incredibly slow. So it's going to be a really poor experience for users if we don't do this simple change.
Just to add to that, there will be some documentation added to the CMIP7 guidance pages over the next week or two, and a communication out to the modelling group mailing list on this.
So one more question, sticking with legacy. Will CMIP5 data then no longer be accessible if it's not being migrated onto the new version?
Yeah, we debated this and discussed this at some length, and we felt that we just didn't have the resources, given the difficulties with CMIP5 data and the way it's organized, to reorganize it into the new format. But that's not preventing individual sites from continuing to serve CMIP5 data if they want to. It's just that it won't be formally through the ESGF system. So I happen to know of sites that are unilaterally carrying on to provide access to that data, even though it's not part of ESGF-NG.
Eleonor, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I was just asking if there was any final questions. We'll make the slides available shortly after. We'll just do a couple of updates to add some information that's come up from the questions, and then we'll make it available on the event webpage and email out to everyone. But as I say, please add your questions on the discussion board as well and raise any issues. Just like thank all our presenters and everyone for joining this morning. So we'll have the recording available as well shortly.